The classroom froze the moment he spoke. A native student, trembling but determined, was mocked by his own teacher for the way he pronounced a single word. Laughter erupted, every echo slicing deeper, while the teacher smirked as if it were a lesson. But what no one knew was that this moment of humiliation would soon rewrite history. And when the truth finally came out, it left the entire school speechless. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above the classroom, their uneven flicker casting restless shadows across the rows of desks. It was third-period American literature at Jefferson High School, the kind of room where the walls were covered with half-faded posters of Shakespeare quotes and laminated charts of proper grammar. The students slouched in their chairs, half bored, half scrolling on hidden phones, waiting for the clock to crawl toward lunch. At the front, Mr. Calloway stood like a sentinel, arms folded over his pressed shirt, his tie knotted too tightly around a thick neck. His voice, when he spoke, had the cutting sharpness of someone who enjoyed holding authority, even in the smallest ways. "All right," he said, pacing the rows with deliberate steps. "Let's hear someone read this passage aloud, so we can talk about structure and tone." No one volunteered. Heads ducked. Eyes pretended to follow along the page. Mr. Calloway smirked, scanning the room like a predator choosing prey. His eyes stopped at the corner desk near the window. "Elias," he said suddenly, "why don't you do us the honor?" Elias Redbird shifted in his seat. 16 years old, his shoulders carried the quiet weight of someone who knew what it meant to stand out. His long black hair was neatly tied back, his books stacked carefully as though order gave him protection. His classmates turned toward him, some curious, some already smirking in anticipation. Elias cleared his throat and rose slowly, his fingers tightening on the open textbook. He began reading the lines, his voice soft but steady, each word rolled out carefully, the syllables shaped by the trace of his accent, an accent born of a home where English intertwined with Lakota rhythms, where words carried both memory and survival. And so it was that he faltered on a word, stretching it out in a way that sounded unfamiliar to the others. It wasn't wrong, just different. From the front, Mr. Calloway raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me," he said, interrupting sharply. "What was that word you just butchered?" The room went still, then cracked with sudden laughter. The sound sliced through the silence like glass shattering. Elias froze. His cheeks burned as his eyes stayed locked on the page. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't even looked up. But the laughter spread, bouncing off the walls, gaining momentum. It wasn't just about the word anymore. It was about him. Mr. Calloway leaned against his desk with folded arms. "Let's try again," he said, drawing out the words like a performance. "Say it properly this time, like the rest of us." The laughter bubbled again, softer this time, waiting for Elias to stumble. Elias's throat tightened. His lips trembled, but he forced the word out again, slower, heavier. His accent still colored it, and though he said it clearly, the damage had already been done. Mr. Calloway tapped his chin dramatically. "Still not quite right. Maybe you should practice more at home. Reading's a skill, you know." The class roared once more, some slapping desks, some exchanging knowing looks. To them, it was entertainment. To Elias, it was a cut that went deeper than any visible wound. He lowered his eyes, staring at the ink on the page, though the words blurred together. His hands gripped the textbook until his knuckles turned white. Inside, humiliation and anger churned like a storm no one else could hear. But behind the hurt, something shifted. A hardness. A vow. Elias sat down quietly, his head still bowed. The laughter slowly died, replaced by the monotonous continuation of the lesson, as though nothing had happened. But the silence inside him was louder than the noise that had filled the room. As the bell finally rang and students filed out, Elias stayed behind a moment longer. His chest rose and fell in steady breaths, trying to contain the fire burning through him. He knew he couldn't fight Mr. Calloway in the same way others might. Words were the only weapon he had ever been taught to wield. "This won't be the last time you hear my voice," he whispered. The echoes of laughter still rang in Elias's ears as he walked home that afternoon, his steps crunching against the gravel path that led from Jefferson High into the stretch of land where his family lived. The small town faded behind him, replaced by the familiar vastness of the reservation. Out here, the air carried the smell of pine and smoke, and the silence wasn't cruel, it was grounding. Elias slowed his pace as the school disappeared from view, letting the rhythm of the land soothe the weight pressing against his chest. On the reservation, he wasn't different. He wasn't a mistake waiting to be corrected. Here, every voice carried its own cadence, every accent its own story. The world beyond might have laughed, but here, his voice sounded like home. The Redbird family lived in a weathered two-bedroom house that had stood for decades, patched and repainted by hand more times than Elias could count. It leaned against the wind like it too had survived more than its share of storms. Inside, the furniture was old but sturdy, the shelves crowded with photographs and beadwork passed down from relatives. Money was scarce, but meaning was everywhere. His mother, Marlene, worked long hours at the community clinic. His father, Joseph, was a quiet man, with eyes that carried both history and grief. He worked odd jobs, carpentry when it was available, maintenance when it wasn't. Elias dropped his backpack on the floor, muttering a soft greeting. His mother noticed the slump of his shoulders, but she didn't press. She knew the school wore him down, piece by piece. Instead, she offered him food, a plate of warm fry bread and beans, comfort wrapped in familiarity. He ate quietly, chewing slowly, as though swallowing down the sting of the day with each bite. Later in his small bedroom, Elias traced the spines of the few books he owned. Most had been given to him by his father. Stories of native history and poetry written by voices that refused to be erased. But he also kept a stack of used paperbacks on American literature, the kind his teachers praised. He read them not because he felt at home in their words, but because he wanted to prove he could master them too. In his heart, Elias carried a dream. He wanted to be taken seriously, not as a token native student, not as a boy with an accent, but as a mind worthy of being heard. History fascinated him because it was more than dates and wars. It was memory, truth, the things people tried to bury. Literature drew him because it gave voice to those memories, shaping them into something that could last. But the classroom, the very place where dreams should have grown, became a battlefield. His accent, his heritage, his silence, each became ammunition for teachers like Mr. Calloway, and for classmates who learned quickly where to aim their laughter. Every mispronounced word, every difference, turned into a reminder that he did not belong. That night, Elias lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, his fists clenched against the sheets. The words Mr. Calloway had said replayed over and over, mocking him long after the bell had rung. Practice more. Say it properly, like the rest of us. He whispered to himself again, the vow forming sharper this time. They'll hear me. One day they'll hear me. A soft knock came at his door. His father's deep voice followed. Elias, you awake? Elias sat up quickly. Yeah, Dad. Come in. Joseph Redbird stepped inside, carrying with him the faint scent of cedar from the fire outside. He sat at the edge of the bed, studying his son with eyes that saw more than Elias wanted to reveal. You've been quiet, Joseph said gently. Quieter than usual. Elias hesitated. He didn't want to sound weak. Just school, he muttered. It's fine. Elias looked up sharply. His father rarely spoke of his own past in detail. Joseph leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. His voice lowered, steady but heavy with memory. When I was your age, I went to a school off the reservation too. They told me my name didn't sound right, that I should shorten it. They told me to stop speaking our language, that it made me sound ignorant. And when I didn't, they mocked me until I believed them. Elias's chest tightened. He had never heard his father admit this kind of wound. They made me feel small. Joseph continued, his gaze distant. Smaller than I ever thought I could be. But the truth? They were afraid. Afraid of voices they couldn't control. Afraid of a history they couldn't erase. That's why they laugh. Elias, because if they laugh, they don't have to listen. Elias swallowed hard. The weight in his chest shifted, still heavy, but different now. Joseph looked at him then, really looked. Don't let them decide how loud your voice should be. You carry more than an accent, son. You carry centuries. You carry a story they don't want to hear, but need to. The room fell quiet, filled only by the distant crackle of the fire outside. Elias lowered his eyes, his heart pounding. He wanted to believe his father's words. He wanted to feel strong, to feel like his voice mattered. But doubt still gnawed at him. Joseph reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper, worn at the edges. He placed it in Elias' hands. This was given to me when I thought I couldn't speak anymore. It's a story, one of ours. Read it tonight. Let it remind you who you are. Elias unfolded the paper carefully. The handwriting was faded but clear. The story beginning with a line that sent a shiver down his spine. It wasn't just history. It was survival, defiance written in ink. His father stood slowly, placing a hand on his shoulder. You don't need to fight them with their weapons. Elias, use ours. Use words. Use truth. When the door closed, Elias stared down at the story in his hands, the words glowing like embers in the dim light. He realized then that his humiliation in class wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Because within the lines of his father's story lay something powerful, something he had never seen his teacher or any of his classmates hold. A truth they could not laugh away. And as Elias began to read, his lips moving silently across the ancient words, the fire inside him grew. He did not know it yet, but the story in his hands would change everything, starting with his next assignment. Elias brought the folded page from his father to school the next morning, tucked into the back cover of his lit book like a quiet shield. He didn't reread it in the hallway, or hold it in his hands like a talisman. He just knew it was there. The knowledge steadied his breathing as he walked into third period, where the hum of fluorescent lights and the scent of dry erase markers always made the room feel colder than it was. He took his seat near the window. He would not repeat yesterday. Today he would watch, listen, and remember. If laughter was the blade, he would learn its shape. A boy at the back, Mean answered timidly when called. Mean. Mr. Calloway stopped him. You know, this would be easier if you used Michael. Or Mike. Think about it, all right? People hire names they can remember. He delivered the line with the breezy tone of a career tip. A kindness wrapped around a blade. Mean's eyes flicked to the door as if measuring the distance. Elias wrote again. Employment prediction tied to name. Control disguised as care. The lesson turned to essays from last week, and Mr. Calloway passed a stack down each row. I left comprehensive feedback, he announced, because in this class we honor clarity. We don't indulge in dialects or cutesy structures. He paused at Dante Morales' desk, tapping the paper. This paragraph reads like a text message. Save the neighborhood slang for the lunch table. You want to be understood? Learn to write like you're speaking to a judge. Dante stared at the red markings crisscrossing his sentences. Whole lines struck through like closed roads. Yes, sir, he murmured. Elias wrote, clarity as code for conformity, courtroom as standard. When Alia's paper came up, Mr. Calloway read a line aloud about her grandmother's church and the cadence of hymns. Pretty, he said dryly, but we're not writing sermons. Strip the rhythm. Prose should be neutral. Alia kept her eyes on her desk. Neutral. Elias felt the words settle in the room like dust. He scribbled, neutral. Erased the drumbeat, the pew, the river, the land. He imagined his father's script pulsing behind the cover of his lit book, alive with a language that refused to sit still. At the whiteboard, Mr. Calloway drew 2 columns, effective and distracting. He wrote under effective, standard diction, linear structure, reliable sources. Under distracting, personal narratives, unverifiable cultural claims, overuse of metaphor. He capped the marker with a satisfied click. I'm not saying your backgrounds don't matter, he said, palms up. The portrait of reason. I'm saying the reader doesn't care. We're learning how to write for the world beyond this room. Elias watched the room nod along. Fear was a quiet collaborator. He wrote, the world whoever he means, reader whoever he picks. The unexpected twist arrived not with a shout, but with a poster. Mr. Calloway unrolled a glossy printout and taped it beside the whiteboard. Jefferson High Cultural Competence Committee. Chair, M. Calloway. The poster listed, monthly workshops on inclusive pedagogy. He stepped back and admired it like a painting. Reminder, tomorrow I'm leading a session for teachers on crafting equitable assessments, he said. We'll be talking about how to serve all learners without lowering standards. The words hung there like a dare. A few students clapped out of habit, the way assemblies trained them to clap for anything laminated. Elias's pen hesitated, then moved, publicly progressive, privately punitive, shield acquired. When he returned papers, Elias received his with a tidy B. Margins mostly clean. A single note in the corner. Your tone is measured. Keep your accent from showing. The comment, absurd on paper, struck true anyway. He reread it 3 times to be sure he hadn't invented it. He traced the letters with his eyes until they blurred. Accent as something that leaks, like a stain. He didn't look up. He just wrote. Accent framed as error. Between lectures, Mr. Calloway told stories about the right way to network, the right way to pronounce entrepreneur, the right way to greet a college admissions officer. Handshakes firm, not over-eager, he said. And for the love of language, don't introduce yourself with a nickname that telegraphs difficulty. Someone joked under their breath that it sounded like LinkedIn as a person. Laughter fluttered, then died. The message had landed. Elias watched how the room bent toward the teacher's gravity. He wrote, "Future imagined as gate you must call by its preferred name." After class, in the corridor, whispers traveled along the lockers like current. "He told me to cut the Yoruba proverb," someone muttered. "Said it was opaque." "He told me the accent mark in my name is pretentious," someone else said. A third voice, "He told me if I keep writing like my mom talks, colleges will think I don't belong." None of them said his name. None of them planned to report it. The committee poster, the neat tie, the measured tone. How do you accuse a performance of what it was designed to conceal? Elias rode the bus home that day, cataloging the pattern like a scientist. He dated each example in his notebook, recorded the exact wording when he could, captured the cadence in shorthand. He wasn't planning a complaint. He was mapping a landscape. The more he wrote, the more he understood the terrain. The jokes about pronunciation that always sounded like friendly corrections. The editing advice that always moved in one direction, toward a center that never included them. He underlined a sentence from his father's page and copied it into the margin. They laughed so they wouldn't hear, and called silence a skill. The next morning, Mr. Calloway introduced a new practice with cheerleader brightness. "Enunciation bonus," he announced, writing it on the board with a flourish. "When you read your work aloud, if your diction is crisp and standard, you'll earn a small bump. Think of it as real-world preparation. The person who hears you won't always be trained to decode. You have to meet them halfway." He turned to Elias with a smile that held nothing warm. "Want to give it a try? A paragraph from your paper?" The class went quiet. Elias felt the paper at his back like a spine and shook his head. "I'll pass today." Mr. Calloway's smile thinned. "Your choice," he said, marking a blank square on his gradebook like a quiet rebuke. By lunch, the bonus had a nickname: the accent tax. No one said it where Mr. Calloway could hear. Dante joked softly that his halfway felt like a cliff. Priya shrugged like she was shedding a weight that clung anyway. "I could speak like a news anchor," she said, "and he'd still say it's too melodic." They laughed, the low kind that is more exhaustion than humor. Elias didn't laugh. He wrote the phrase down, boxed it, then drew a small arrow pointing forward, as if it belonged to something not yet visible. The pattern sharpened again during a peer review exercise. Mr. Calloway paired students who didn't usually sit together and told them to read each other's drafts. Elias found himself with Sloane Whitaker, who wore varsity jackets like armor and said everything with the confidence of someone who had never been told her voice was wrong. She slid him her essay titled "Why Merit Matters," written in clipped lines, neat and bloodless. "So," she said, tapping her nail on his desk, "be ruthless. He always is." Elias handed her his piece about stories and land, measured, careful, but still carrying the drumbeat underneath. She read, then met his eyes. "I like it," she said, surprised at her own voice. "It feels like it's actually saying something." She lowered her tone. "He's going to call it sentimental." Elias thought of his quiet archive. "I know," he said. The twist uncoiled near the end of class. Mr. Calloway waved a stack of photocopies. "Before you go, an example of what not to do." The heading at the top read, "Oral Histories and National Narratives." The passage described a people refusing to let the river rename itself, told in the same measured pulse that lived behind Elias's book cover. Elias felt his shoulders tense before he knew why. The phrasing, the image of the river, it was his father's story, excerpted without credit, stripped of context and presented like a specimen pinned to a lab tray. Mr. Calloway circled a paragraph with his marker. "See this?" he said. "This is why personal myth fails. It can't carry the weight of fact." He underlined myth twice. For a second the room lost its shape. Elias pressed his palms against his thighs to keep from reaching for the page. He didn't speak. He did the other thing. He watched. He watched how the class took the cue to smirk, how the margins filled with notes that used the teacher's words as if they were their own. He wrote one line in his notebook. "Hand steady. He can't hear what he's holding." When the bell rang, Mr. Calloway raised a hand for silence, as if remembering something from a bright place. "One more thing," he said. "Our major project for the quarter." He flipped the board to reveal the title already written, History Rewrite. The letters were blocky, certain, almost triumphant. You will each choose a common historical narrative and rewrite it to correct bias toward objectivity, he said. His gaze roamed the room and landed on Elias, as though called by a magnet. No legends, no local color, no unverifiable lore. Think textbooks, not campfire. He let the last word sit, smug and smoky. This project will count for half your grade. The room exhaled in a single sound, half awe, half alarm. Elias closed his notebook over his father's page like a hand closing over a match. As Mr. Calloway dismissed the class, Elias looked up at the word rewrite and realized he wasn't being invited to fix history. He was being dared to erase himself. By the time he reached the door, he had already decided he would do neither. The word rewrite lingered in Elias's mind long after he left the classroom. He carried it down the hallway, past the clusters of students laughing too loudly, past the cafeteria where trays clattered and voices tangled in noisy waves. To most of them, the assignment was just another heavy project, one more academic obstacle in a semester of hurdles. But to Elias, the word carried weight, challenge disguised as opportunity, or perhaps a trap waiting to be sprung. He slipped into the library during study hall, choosing the farthest corner where the hum of computers and the soft shuffle of bookshelves offered him quiet. He opened his notebook, flipped past the pages where he had documented Calloway's pattern, and stared at a fresh sheet. History rewrite, he wrote at the top, underlining it twice. The pen hovered as he thought of his father's story. It wasn't just a story. It was a memory etched into generations, a refusal to be erased, even when silence was demanded. The tale of a people who stood beside a river and told the government it would not change its name, no matter what the map said. The river carried their word, and the word carried their history. And yet, in Calloway's hands, it had become an example of failure, a myth stripped of power. Elias tapped the pen against the page. He saw the irony now. The very assignment meant to demand objectivity was the perfect place to show that objectivity had never existed. Every history was someone's story told louder, written sharper, and printed wider. Why couldn't he? That night, at the kitchen table, Elias spread his books wide. His mother washed dishes behind him, humming softly, while his father repaired a cracked chair leg in the corner. Elias began outlining ideas in silence. He didn't want to announce his plan, not yet. He wrote, "Erase erasure, tell the story behind the silence. Show them what they call myth is memory." The clock ticked on. His mother glanced over her shoulder. "Homework?" "Yes," Elias murmured. His father looked up briefly, saw the scattered books, the way Elias gripped his pen, and gave a small nod of understanding without asking further. Elias felt his father's quiet support like a steady hand on his shoulder. Over the next days, Elias built his essay like a fortress. He didn't just pull from his father's page, he expanded outward. He searched the library catalog, found volumes on native resistance, treaties broken, names stolen from the land. He jotted notes in a spiral, layering facts with memory, building bridges between what the textbooks called history and what his people called truth. He thought of Calloway's rules. No legends, no unverifiable lore. Elias smiled to himself. If he could show the same story in the words of documented scholars, government reports, and newspapers, Calloway would have to face it. The river wasn't just a story, it had records. It had signatures. It had scars that the state could not erase, no matter how neatly typed its documents. The twist came when Elias realized the more he researched, the clearer the pattern became. Native history wasn't absent because it lacked evidence. It was absent because someone chose not to see it. Entire pages existed, ignored, names buried in footnotes, stories filed as folklore. Despite first-hand testimony, the erasure wasn't passive, it was deliberate. At school, while others grumbled about the workload, Elias carried a growing fire. His classmates saw him hunched over notes in the library, whispering with the new librarian, Miss Alvarez, who pointed him toward shelves many students never touched. The essay became more than an assignment. It became resistance, stitched line by line. Each sentence felt like laying a stone on the path his father had hinted at. He wove his people's story into the broader American narrative. Not asking permission, not seeking approval, he was rewriting not for a grade but for survival, for a place at the table his teacher tried to push him away from. But the tension sharpened in class. Calloway's comments grew more pointed whenever Elias spoke. One morning, when Elias answered a question about an assigned reading, Calloway cut him off. "Interesting. But let's stick to interpretations grounded in the text, not personal experiences. The words stung because Elias hadn't mentioned anything personal. Still, the class laughed, trained to find humor in his silencing. Another time, Calloway introduced a passage about manifest destiny. He spoke of ambition, progress, destiny fulfilled. Elias raised his hand carefully. But destiny for who? He asked. A murmur rippled across the room. Calloway froze for a moment, then smiled thinly. A valid question. If we're writing essays for activism groups. But here we're studying literature, not politics. His tone clipped the air like scissors through fabric. Elias sat back, pulse racing. He didn't argue, he just added another note to his growing case. Questions dismissed as political when they disrupt comfort. At home, Elias worked late into the night. His desk light glowed against the window, visible from the road like a lighthouse. His essay draft sprawled in messy handwriting across pages that overflowed with underlines and arrows. Every time fatigue hit, he heard his father's words. They laugh so they don't have to listen. And he pressed. The unexpected twist came one evening, when Elias's younger cousin Noah stopped by after basketball practice. He spotted the notes and leaned over. "What are you writing?" "School paper," Elias said. Noah skimmed a few lines, his brow furrowing. "This is different. You're not just writing for class. You're writing like you want to prove something." Elias looked up. "I did." Noah hesitated, then shrugged. "Just be careful. Teachers don't like when you talk back, even on paper." That warning stayed with Elias. It wasn't fear of failing. It was the realization that his resistance, no matter how carefully framed, would be read as defiance. And defiance came with consequences. But he kept going, because silence, he decided, was the heavier price. By the end of the week, Elias had pieced together something fierce and unyielding. It wasn't perfect yet, but it carried the pulse of his father's story, fortified with evidence Calloway couldn't dismiss. He read the final lines aloud to himself, the words trembling in his voice, but not in their meaning. For the first time, he felt his accent wasn't a weakness. It was a signature, proof the story came from a place Calloway could never own. The day before the project was due, Elias stayed late in the library, polishing citations. As he packed up, he passed the teacher's lounge. The door stood slightly ajar, voices leaking out. He froze when he recognized Calloway's. "These assignments will separate the serious students from the pretenders," Calloway was saying, his tone casual but edged. "Kids like him never make it past community college. This'll show where he belongs." Another teacher chuckled softly. The sound burned more than the words. Elias stood in the hallway, his breath catching, his fingers gripping the strap of his backpack. The essay pages inside suddenly felt heavier, as though they carried not just words but a wager, his worth stacked against his teacher's dismissal. Elias turned away from the door, pulse hammering, a single thought anchoring him. If Calloway wanted proof of where he belonged, Elias would make sure his essay delivered something no dismissal could erase. Elias couldn't shake Calloway's voice from the teacher's lounge. "Kids like him never make it past community college." It repeated in his head like a low drum beat, steady and cruel. By the time he sat in class the next morning, his essay draft tucked inside his folder, he knew Calloway wasn't just waiting for him to fail. He was preparing to make failure inevitable. The days leading up to the essay deadline stretched like a gauntlet. Calloway seemed to single Elias out more than ever. His methods sly enough to seem like teaching, sharp enough to sting. On Monday, Calloway leaned against the desk, flipping through the class text. "Let's practice enunciation," he announced. His eyes roamed the room, before settling on Elias. "Redbird, stand and read the opening paragraph, please." Elias rose slowly, textbook in hand. The words swam in front of him. As his heart pounded, he spoke carefully, steady, but halfway through, a vowel slipped into the shape of home, rather than the flat tone. Calloway demanded. "There it is," Calloway said brightly, as if catching a child sneaking candy. "You hear that, class? A subtle shift. It may seem small, but this is exactly how credibility evaporates in professional settings. Imagine giving a presentation and sounding provincial." The laughter came, predictable as thunder after lightning. Elias stayed rooted, finished the paragraph without faltering, then sat down. He wrote one word in the margin of his notebook, provincial. He underlined it 3 times. On Tuesday, Calloway introduced a discussion on persuasive writing. Effective persuasion avoids unnecessary ornamentation. he said. Let's test that. Redbird summarized yesterday's reading. Elias summarized concisely, but Calloway tilted his head. Interesting. Notice the cadence? A little heavy, isn't it? Almost like storytelling. Persuasion requires efficiency, not performance. The word performance stuck in the air like a jab. The students chuckled. Elias kept his eyes on the desk, hand moving across his notebook. Storytelling, inefficiency. Their rulebook. By Wednesday, the rhythm had become cruel theater. Calloway called on Elias during grammar drills, during vocabulary quizzes, during moments when other students sat invisible. He waited for slips, for an unfamiliar rhythm, for anything that would feed the room's hunger for mockery. The classmates played along. They smirked, whispered, laughed at cues. It wasn't always malicious. Sometimes it was nervous, automatic, but every chuckle, every grin reinforced the hierarchy. Calloway at the top, Elias as the punchline. And yet, even in the sting of it, Elias discovered something he hadn't expected. The more Calloway pressed him, the more he wrote. His notebook, once a quiet log of observations, became his private battlefield. After each class, he filled its pages, words Calloway used, the way the class responded, the feeling in his chest as laughter struck. He was turning pain into evidence, evidence into sentences, sentences into something sharper than shame. It was as if Calloway, in trying to silence him, was sharpening his voice. At night, Elias returned to his desk light, spreading drafts across the surface. His essay grew teeth. He wrote not just history but reflection. How the erasure of voices was not an accident, but a choice. How ridicule became a tool to enforce silence. He rewrote sections until his hand cramped, then started again. The laughter from class still echoed in his head, but now it fueled him. Thursday brought the unexpected twist. Calloway announced a practice exercise for the essay. Each of you will share one paragraph aloud for feedback, he said. Constructive criticism only, of course. His eyes gleamed. Elias's pulse quickened. His draft was raw, dangerous in its honesty. If he read a paragraph aloud, Calloway would seize it, shred it, parade its pieces as mistakes. When his turn came, Elias stood, unfolded the paper, and chose a section deliberately, a carefully factual paragraph about the 1830 Indian Removal Act, citing government records. His voice was steady, his accent present but unshaken. Silence followed. Calloway tapped his pen against the desk, searching for an opening. Finally, he smiled thinly. Accurate, but emotionally loaded. Notice, class, how his tone implies judgment. History must be neutral. The class nodded obediently. Elias sat down, expression calm, though his chest burned. He wrote in his notebook later. Neutral, stripped of pain. Stripped of By Friday, whispers spread through the room. Students speculated about who would win the top grade. Sloane, definitely, one said, glancing at the confident blonde in the front row. Her stuff is always what he likes. Clean, sharp, no drama. Others guessed Dante, or Elias. No one mentioned Elias. That afternoon, as the bell rang, Elias gathered his things slowly. He slid his essay into his folder, the words inside glowing like embers. As he zipped his backpack, a quiet voice came from behind. It was Priya. She leaned closer, eyes cautious. Hey, she whispered. I don't know what you're writing, but just so you know, Mr. Calloway already told Sloane she's basically guaranteed the top grade. He said her essay embodies objectivity. Elias froze. The folder felt heavier on his lap. He told her that. Priya nodded, expression apologetic. I just thought you should know. He's already decided. The hallway outside filled with the noise of students rushing toward the weekend. But Elias sat still, the words sinking deep. His essay wasn't just being graded. It was being buried before it was even read. As Elias walked out of class, Priya's warning replayed in his mind, louder with each step. He's already chosen his winner. Elias clenched his backpack strap, whispering to himself, then I'll make sure my essay leaves him no choice. The weekend brought no rest. Elias carried Priya's warning with him like a stone in his chest. He's already chosen his winner. The thought shadowed him as he revised his essay late into the night, his lamp flickering against pages scattered across the desk. Every word he wrote felt like a rebellion, but also like a gamble. If Calloway had already sealed the outcome, what chance did his paper truly have? On Monday, the halls buzzed with the usual noise of lockers and chatter. But Elias walked with his head low, his essay draft pressed tightly inside his backpack. He drifted toward the library during lunch, needing the quiet more than food. It had become his sanctuary, a place where the hum of fluorescent lights was less mocking, where the smell of old paper and dust offered a steadier kind of silence. But that day, something was different. Behind the counter wasn't the usual tired librarian who rarely looked up from her computer. Instead, a woman Elias had never seen before stacked, returned books into neat piles. She looked to be in her late 30s, with sharp, observant eyes behind glasses and dark hair swept into a low bun. When Elias walked in, she glanced up immediately, not just at him but into him. "First one here," she said with a smile that wasn't forced. "You must know the good hiding spots." Elias gave a small nod, unsure how to answer. He slipped past her and headed to his corner table, opening his notebook as if to build a wall of paper between them. Minutes later, the sound of footsteps drew closer. The woman stopped at his table, holding a stack of returned books. "Working on something big?" she asked, her voice light but carrying a genuine curiosity. Elias hesitated, then shrugged. "Just a school project." "History?" she guessed, eyeing the titles spread across his desk. Volumes on native treaties, resistance movements, and oral traditions. His head lifted in surprise. "Yeah." She set the stack down on a nearby shelf, then extended a hand. "Miss Alvarez, I'm filling in as librarian this semester." "Elias," he said quietly, shaking her hand. She nodded toward his notes. "That looks like more than just homework." Elias pressed his lips together. He didn't want to reveal too much, not when every authority figure so far had twisted his voice into something small. But Ms. Alvarez didn't move away. Instead, she leaned slightly, scanning his notes without touching them. "You're tracing the gaps," she said softly. Elias frowned. "The what?" "The spaces where history left things out," she explained. "See this line here about the treaty? The official record is only half the story. You're looking for the half that was erased." He blinked. No teacher had ever named what he was doing, not even his father. He had just thought of it as filling silence. "I used to do the same," she added, adjusting her glasses. "Different history, different silences. But the pattern's familiar." Something shifted in Elias then. It wasn't trust, not yet, but recognition. Someone who understood the weight of digging. Over the next few days, Ms. Alvarez became a quiet presence in the library. Whenever Elias worked, she didn't hover, didn't lecture. Instead, she placed books on his table without comment. Rare volumes tucked deep in the stacks. Academic journals most students never touched. First-hand accounts from native authors that Elias had never seen referenced in class. Each time she simply said, "Might help," and walked away. Elias devoured them. He underlined passages, copied lines into his notebook, weaving them into his essay, until it grew richer, sharper. For the first time, his work felt validated, not dismissed. One afternoon, as he flipped through a collection of speeches from native leaders, Ms. Alvarez returned with a slim, leather-bound book. She placed it carefully on the table. "This one doesn't circulate. Most students never even notice it exists." Elias ran his fingers across the cover. "Why are you showing me this?" She looked at him steadily. "Because you're actually listening." The words struck him harder than expected. Listening. Not mocking, not correcting, not flattening. Listening. Still, doubt tugged at him. "It won't matter. Calloway's already decided who's getting the top grade." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "He told you that?" Elias shook his head. "He told someone else. But it's true." Miss Alvarez leaned against the table. "Listen, Elias. Grades matter, but they're not the whole game. Sometimes what you write isn't just about a score. It's about what lingers after the paper's put away." Elias looked down at his draft, the words blurring. "He laughs at the way I speak. He calls my voice provincial, like it's wrong just for existing." Ms. Alvarez's expression softened. "When I was your age, my English teacher told me my essays sounded too foreign. He said if I wanted to be taken seriously, I needed to stop writing about my family's migration and start writing about real history." Elias's eyes widened. "What did you do?" "I kept writing about my family," she said simply. And years later, one of those essays ended up in a university anthology. The same story he dismissed. Got me into a master's program. Her voice carried a steadiness Elias hadn't realized he needed. It wasn't pity. It wasn't empty encouragement. It was proof. proof that the things he feared could be turned into strength. For the first time, Elias felt seen by someone who held authority, not as a problem to be corrected, but as a voice worth amplifying. But the twist came 2 days later. Elias returned to the library, only to find Ms. Alvarez in a tense conversation with the principal near the entrance. Their voices were low, but Elias caught enough. "Some teachers feel you're overstepping," the principal said carefully, sharing materials outside the curriculum. Ms. Alvarez's tone was calm but firm. "Providing resources is part of my job. If students are asking deeper questions, shouldn't we support them?" The principal sighed, glancing around. "Just tread lightly. We don't need unnecessary friction." Elias ducked behind a shelf before they could see him, heart pounding. He realized then that Miss Alvarez wasn't safe from Calloway's reach either. By helping him, she was putting herself at risk. That night, Elias read the leather-bound book she'd slipped him. Its pages were filled with first-hand accounts of boarding schools, children punished for speaking their language, their names changed, their hair cut. The stories felt like his father's whispers, but louder, insistent. He copied passages feverishly, weaving them into his essay draft. The more he wrote, the less afraid he felt. If Ms. Alvarez was willing to take risks to help him, he couldn't afford to shrink. "Elias," she said, lowering her voice, "if you do this right, your words won't just change a grade, they'll change the room." Her words followed him out of the library, ringing louder than any of Calloway's dismissals. Elias paused in the hallway, gripping his essay draft tighter. If his words could change the room, he wondered, could they also expose the man who ruled it? The morning of the presentations arrived heavy with expectation. Students shuffled into the classroom carrying stapled essays and tired eyes. The low chatter of weekend gossip, mixing with the clatter of backpacks against desks. But Elias entered differently. Calm on the surface, storm underneath. His folder felt weighty against his chest, though the pages inside were lighter than air compared to the weight they carried. He slid into his usual seat near the window, watching sunlight streak faintly across the rows of desks. For days he had lived inside the rhythm of his essay, reciting it under his breath like a prayer, rewriting passages, until the words pulsed with both anger and clarity. Miss Alvarez's voice still rang in his mind. "If you do this right, your words won't just change a grade, they'll change the room." Mr. Calloway strode to the front, tie knotted too neatly, expression brisk. "Today we'll hear your history rewrite projects. This is an opportunity to demonstrate clarity, neutrality, and precision. Remember, objectivity is the goal. Facts matter. Legends do not." His eyes skimmed the class, pausing a half-second longer on Elias before moving on. Names were called, one by one. Sloane read first, her essay a clean dissection of the Founding Fathers and the spirit of progress. Her sentences marched like soldiers, polished, obedient, bloodless. Calloway nodded approvingly. "Excellent demonstration of balance," he praised. The room buzzed with affirmation. Sloane sat taller in her chair. Dante followed, presenting on civil rights. His essay was bold but clipped by caution, avoiding personal tie-ins. Calloway offered a measured smile. "Passionate, but watch the rhetoric," he advised, his pen tapping the desk. The class absorbed the comment like gospel. As the names dwindled, Elias's pulse quickened. He knew his turn was coming. He could feel Calloway circling him like a hawk. Finally, the inevitable. "Redbird, your turn." The classroom shifted, all eyes on him. Some students leaned forward, eager for the entertainment they'd grown used to. Others smirked, waiting for Calloway to pounce. Elias stood, paper in hand. His palms tingled, his throat dry, but his voice came steady. He did not begin with an apology, nor with a disclaimer. He began with land. "This school," Elias read, his gaze flicking briefly around the room, "stands on what was once Lakota ground. Before Jefferson High, before the subdivisions in the strip mall, there was a river the people here named, a river the maps renamed. My family still carries the old word. The official histories do not." The room stilled. The usual rustle of pens and whispers disappeared. Elias continued, each line deliberate. He recounted treaties signed and broken, not from the perspective of lawmakers, but from the voices of those who were forced to move, those whose children were sent to boarding schools to have their languages cut out of them. He cited government documents and paired them with oral histories, showing how absence in the record was not accident but intention. "Objectivity," he said, his voice strengthening. is not neutral when silence is chosen. To erase pain is not to erase truth. It is to bury it alive. The silence deepened. Some students shifted uneasily, their smirks fading. Others lowered their eyes, the weight of his words pressing down heavier than any textbook paragraph. Elias pressed on, his accent curling around each sentence with quiet defiance. What once made him a target now made his words ring distinct, undeniable. He told them about the river, about the children who were punished for speaking their own names, about how history written by victors pretended neutrality, but carried sharp edges. By the time he reached his final paragraph, his chest was heaving, though his voice did not shake. This, he concluded, is not legend. This is not myth. This is history written in broken treaties, in lost names, in the soil beneath this very building. And to rewrite history truthfully is not disrespect. It is repair. The final words hung in the air, like smoke that refused to clear. The class, expecting Calloway's cue to laugh, found none. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was total, but not empty. It was heavy, reverent, unsettled. For the first time, Elias stood before them not as the subject of mockery, but as a voice that could not be dismissed. And then, slam. The sound made several students jump. Mr. Calloway had brought his hand down hard on the desk, face flushed, jaw tight. The silence shattered. That, he snapped, is not history. That is propaganda. That is disrespect. His voice rose, sharp and cutting. To stand here and accuse the foundations of this nation of erasure. How dare you? This is exactly why neutrality is necessary. Without it, you turn education into activism, and activism into noise. The students froze. Some stared at Calloway in shock. Others glanced at Elias with a mix of fear and awe. Elias stood still, his essay trembling slightly in his hand. But his eyes did not lower this time. Mr. Calloway leaned forward, pointing a finger toward Elias like a gavel falling. You will not disrespect history in my classroom. The day after Elias read his essay, the atmosphere in class was different. The usual easy laughter was gone, replaced by a nervous hum, like the room itself was holding its breath. Students avoided Elias's gaze, though a few stole glances when they thought he wasn't looking. They'd seen something shift yesterday, something they weren't used to, a silence that wasn't built on humiliation but on weight.
Mr. Calloway, however, entered as though nothing had changed. He adjusted his tie, stacked his papers with clinical precision, and spoke in a measured tone that carried its own warning. I'll be returning your essays today, he announced. Some of you excelled, some will learn a valuable lesson about the importance of objectivity.
The stack of papers looked thicker than it should have. When Calloway began distributing them, his comments rolled out like rehearsed lines. Excellent clarity. Careful use of sources. Balanced argument. Each paper slid across the desk, paired with either quiet praise or faint criticism. When he reached Elias, the room tensed. Calloway placed the essay on his desk with deliberate slowness. A red F marked the top corner, circled twice, bleeding across the page like a wound. The words blurred as Elias read them again and again. His throat tightened, but no sound came out. The class sat frozen. No one laughed this time. Some shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Elias and the desk. Elias finally lifted his gaze, meeting Calloway's eyes. For a second he thought about speaking, about calling it what it was. But his tongue felt heavy, his body drained. He lowered his eyes again, the red F glaring up at him like a verdict. Whispers began to ripple once class ended. Sloane murmured to a friend. That wasn't fair. Dante whispered. He cited everything. I saw it. Priya bit her lip, watching Elias gather his things with quiet devastation. At lunch, Elias sat alone in the courtyard, his essay clutched tightly in his hands. He flipped through the pages, seeing Calloway's dismissive notes scrawled across the margins. Too emotional. Unverified. Folklore, not history. Every strike-through felt like an erasure, not of his words, but of his people. He thought of his father's story, of Miss Alvarez's encouragement, of the silence that had filled the room after his presentation. For one fragile moment, his essay had shifted the ground beneath him, and now, with a single letter, Calloway had crushed it underfoot. Priya approached quietly, sitting beside him. It's wrong, she said softly. Everyone knows it. Elias didn't look up. Doesn't matter. The grade's what goes on the record. But people heard you, she pressed. They can't unhear it. He closed the essay, sliding it back into his folder. Grades decide futures. What people heard won't change that. But inside, doubt wrestled with something stronger. He wasn't sure if he believed his own words. The unexpected twist came later that evening. As Elias sat at his desk at home, staring blankly at the failed essay, his phone buzzed. A notification, then another, and another. Confused, he picked it up. A link had been sent by Dante with a short message. "Don't be mad, just read." Elias clicked. The screen opened to a post on a student-run forum. At the top was the title of his essay, "Rewriting History, the Erasure Beneath Our Feet." Someone, Dante, he realized, had uploaded the entire paper, typed word for word. Beneath it, comments were already flooding in.
This gave me chills.
"Why don't we learn this in class? This is better than half the history books I've read." The post had been up for less than an hour, and already dozens of students had shared it. Some defended it openly. Others debated in threads, arguing whether it counted as real history or bias. But no one ignored it. Elias's chest tightened. The essay that had been buried by Calloway's grade was suddenly alive, moving through hallways he couldn't walk himself, being read by people who had never looked at him twice. He scrolled further and saw a comment that stopped him cold. "This is about our school. Did you know we're literally on former reservation land? He's not making this up. It's documented. My dad works in real estate. I've seen the maps." The truth Elias had spoken wasn't just resonating. It was being confirmed, amplified, and carried beyond Calloway's classroom. He dropped the phone onto the desk, staring at his essay. The red F looked smaller now, almost ridiculous compared to the flood of voices rising outside those margins. But with the fire came fear. If Calloway found out his essay was spreading, retaliation wouldn't stop at a grade. Teachers had power beyond letters. They shaped reputations, recommendations, futures. Still, Elias felt a spark he couldn't smother. For the first time, he wasn't alone in carrying his words. The next morning at school, whispers filled the hallways. Students leaned against lockers, phones in hand, murmuring about the essay. Some nodded at Elias as he passed, quiet recognition in their eyes. Others avoided him, afraid of being linked to the storm gathering. Calloway, however, seemed oblivious, or perhaps simply simmering. He ran class with stiff efficiency, ignoring the undercurrent of murmurs. But when his eyes met Elias's, the air tightened. Elias sat straighter, his failed essay still in his folder, but now paired with something else, momentum. He had been buried, but his words were climbing out of the dirt faster than Calloway could shovel them back. As Elias left class, his phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a student. It was a local journalist asking, "Are you the author of this essay? I'd like to talk." Elias sat at the edge of his bed, the glow of his phone screen painting his face in pale blue. The message from the journalist still stared back at him. "Are you the author of this essay? I'd like to talk." His thumb hovered above the reply button, but his chest felt tight, like a cord pulled between fear and possibility. The essay had been meant for one classroom, one teacher, one grade. Now it was escaping into places Elias never imagined. The red F in the corner of his paper suddenly felt like a small cage compared to the wildfire that had leapt beyond its bars. He didn't reply, not yet. Instead, he scrolled. The forum post that Dante had shared was no longer just circulating among students. It had been screenshotted, reposted on Twitter, Instagram, even TikTok slideshows with dramatic captions. "Student exposes hidden history at Jefferson High." The comments flooded in. "This kid is braver than most adults I know. Why weren't we taught this?" Calloway sounds like the kind of teacher who only wants one version of the story. And then came the amplification that Elias never saw coming. Native activists, writers, and community pages began sharing the essay under hashtags like "Rewriting History" and "Our Voices Matter." Some paired it with their own family stories, connecting Elias's words to generations of silence broken. Elias's heart raced as he watched the shares multiply. His words, once buried beneath an F, now had legs running farther and faster than he ever could. But along with praise came friction. A thread appeared on Facebook. Parents debating furiously. Some applauded the courage, saying students needed more honesty in classrooms. Others accused the essay of being revisionist or political. A man commented, "This is why kids can't read Shakespeare anymore. Too busy crying over myths." The thread spiraled, hundreds of replies deep. Elias sat back, phone buzzing nonstop. He felt both exposed and powerful. like standing on a cliff where the view was breathtaking but the drop was terrifying. The next morning, Jefferson High buzzed with a new kind of energy. Whispers followed Elias through the hallways. Some students offered quiet nods, subtle gestures of respect. Others stared like he had grown into someone unrecognizable. A few muttered insults under their breath, parroting words they'd read online. When Elias entered Calloway's classroom, the tension was electric. Calloway stood at the front, posture rigid, eyes colder than usual. He said nothing about the essay, nothing about the storm brewing outside, but the way he glanced at Elias, jaw clenched, made it clear. He knew. During group work, Dante leaned across the desk. "Man, it's everywhere," he whispered. "I didn't think it would blow up like this." Elias shot him a sharp look. "You posted it without asking me." "I know," Dante admitted, guilt flickering in his eyes. "But if I hadn't, would anyone be listening right now?" Elias wanted to be angry, but part of him knew Dante was right. Still, he kept his voice low. "You should have told me first."
"Yeah," Dante said quietly.
"I should have, but Elias, this isn't just yours anymore. People out there needed it." By lunch, things escalated further. A local news site ran a headline: "High School Essay Challenges Historical Silence." The article quoted passages from Elias's work and included comments from parents and community members. One parent said, "If what this student wrote is true, the school has a responsibility to teach it." Another countered, "This is activist nonsense. Schools are supposed to teach facts, not feeling." The article didn't mention Elias by name, but inside the school, everyone knew. When Elias returned to the library, Ms. Alvarez was waiting with the article pulled up on her computer. She turned the screen toward him. "It's out there now," she said.
Elias rubbed the back of his neck, uneasy. I didn't want.
"You wanted the truth told," she interrupted gently. "And now it is. You can't control where it goes, Elias, but you can control how you carry it." He sank into the chair, overwhelmed. "Calloway's going to come after me." Ms. Alvarez studied him for a long moment. "Then make sure you're not standing alone." Her words lingered as he walked home that day. Not standing alone. But what did that mean? When the man grading his papers also had the power to decide how colleges would see him. That night, the story spread even further. A well-known native author shared the essay link on Twitter, calling it a reminder that the next generation refuses silence. Within hours, the post had thousands of likes, thousands of shares. Elias's phone vibrated, until he silenced it, overwhelmed by voices, some lifting him, others attacking him, all louder than anything he'd ever known. At dinner, his mother noticed his silence, the way he barely touched his food. "Elias, you okay?" He hesitated, then pushed his phone across the table to her. She scrolled, her eyes widening as she realized the scale of it. His father leaned in, reading over her shoulder, his face unreadable. Finally, Joseph spoke. "This is bigger than a grade now." Elias swallowed. "And what if it ruins me?" His father shook his head slowly. "No, this isn't ruin. This is exposure. And exposure is dangerous, but it's also powerful." The house felt smaller that night, the weight of the outside world pressing against its walls. Elias lay awake, wondering how long before the storm reached his classroom in a way he couldn't escape. The answer came the next morning. Every head turned. Some students smirked. Others looked concerned. Elias felt his stomach drop, but he stood anyway, sliding his notebook into his backpack. The walk down the hall felt endless. The principal's door loomed ahead, polished wood with a nameplate that suddenly looked like a warning. He knocked once, then stepped inside. The principal sat behind her desk, lips pressed into a thin line, and to her left, arms crossed, eyes sharp as blades, stood Mr. Calloway. The door clicked shut behind Elias, sealing him in the room where both judgment and reckoning waited. The office smelled faintly of lemon polish and tension. Elias stood just inside the doorway, his backpack still slung over one shoulder, as the door clicked shut behind him. The principal, Ms. Whitaker, gestured toward a chair across from her desk. "Sit down, Elias," she said, her voice calm but edged with something rehearsed. Elias slid into the chair, his heart thudding in his ears. He didn't look at Calloway right away, but he could feel the teacher's presence like a shadow pressing against the room. Arms crossed, jaw locked, Calloway stood tall, the picture of a man wronged and waiting for vindication. Miss Whitaker folded her hands on the desk. "I'm sure you know why you're here." Elias nodded once. "Careful." It's about my essay. Yes, she said. Your essay and the attention it has drawn. Calloway leaned forward, seizing the opening. This is exactly the problem I warned about. He used a school assignment to launch an attack, not only on me, but on the curriculum, and now it's circulating online, out of context, fueling outrage. His tone carried the righteous sting of someone framing themselves as a victim. Elias clenched his fists beneath the desk. I didn't post it online. Calloway scoffed. Convenient. But you benefited from it. You let it spread without correction. Ms. Whitaker raised a hand, trying to still the tension. Let's be clear, Elias, we're not here to accuse you of misconduct. But we are concerned about the consequences of this situation. She paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound too harsh. The essay is powerful, she admitted carefully. But some of its phrasing, some of the emotional tone, could be seen as divisive. Parents are calling. Community members are writing emails. This school's reputation is at stake. Elias's chest tightened. So what are you asking me to do? Miss Whitaker exchanged a glance with Calloway before answering. We'd like you to revise the essay, tone it down, remove some of the language about erasure. Erasure? Elias cut in, his voice sharper than he intended. That's the whole point. It happened. It still happened. Calloway slammed a palm lightly against the desk. You see? Disrespect. He can't follow guidelines. He was told to focus on facts, not myths. Instead, he paraded sentimentality and disguised it as scholarship. Elias finally turned to face him. His voice was low, but steady. You failed me because I didn't write history the way you wanted it. Not because it wasn't history. The words landed heavy. Calloway's face flushed, but he said nothing. Miss Whitaker sighed, leaning back in her chair. Elias, listen, I understand your passion. I do. But sometimes it's not just about being right. It's about how it's received. If you continue refusing to adjust your essay, this will keep growing, and not in a way that helps you. For a long moment, Elias didn't respond. He thought of his father telling him that laughter was fear disguised. He thought of Miss Alvarez placing the leather-bound book in his hands. He thought of the silence in the classroom after he'd read his words. The silence that felt like truth hanging heavier than any dismissal. Finally, he said, I won't rewrite it. Calloway barked a bitter laugh. Of course. Stubbornness dressed as principle. Elias didn't look at him. He looked at the principle. If I change it, it won't be the truth anymore. And if the truth is divisive, maybe that's the problem, not me. The room went quiet. Ms. Whitaker's expression wavered, caught between administrative caution and a glimmer of reluctant respect. Calloway's glare hardened, his silence more dangerous than words. Very well, Miss Whitaker said at last. But understand, Elias, your choice will come with consequences. Elias rose slowly, his backpack heavy on his shoulder. I know, he said. His voice didn't waver. I've already lived with consequences. As he walked out, the air in the office felt thick with something unresolved, something boiling just beneath the surface. That evening, Elias sat at his desk, the failed essay spread open beside his phone. Notifications buzzed endlessly, a rhythm he'd tried to ignore. Finally, curiosity won. He unlocked the screen and froze. A major education blog, one that teachers, parents, and students across the country followed, had just published his essay in full under the headline, High School Student Dares to Rewrite History. Elias stared at the headline, pulse racing. His words weren't just circling his school anymore. They were about to crash into the national conversation. By the end of the week, Jefferson High was no longer just a school. It was a battleground. The announcement went out on a Wednesday afternoon. Thursday evening, 6 p.m., Jefferson High Auditorium. Open to parents, staff, and students. When Elias read the email on his phone, his stomach dropped. It wasn't just about a grade anymore. It was about him, his words, his voice, becoming the center of a public storm. That night at dinner, his mother set down her fork with a sigh. They're going to make you the example, she said, voice heavy. His father leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. Then we'll be there with him. He won't stand alone. Elias nodded, though his appetite was gone. A week ago, his essay was just a paper with an F on it. Now it was a spark lighting up rooms he hadn't stepped into yet, forcing conversations he'd only whispered at home. The day of the meeting, the air around school felt electric. Students whispered in hallways, teachers exchanged tight-lipped looks. Some gave Elias nods of quiet encouragement, Others avoided him as if proximity alone could pull them into controversy. By evening, the auditorium filled quickly. Parents packed the rows, some holding printed copies of the essay, others clutching signs hastily made with slogans like "Protect Education" and "Teach All Voices." Local journalists carried cameras and notebooks, their presence a reminder that this story had grown bigger than the walls of Jefferson High. Elias walked in with his father on one side and Ms. Alvarez on the other. His father's broad shoulders seemed to shield him from the stares, while Ms. Alvarez gave a small nod of reassurance. Elias clutched his notebook, fingers trembling slightly, the pages inside filled with lines he had scribbled the night before, reminders, arguments, fragments of courage. They took seats near the back, away from the crowd, but Elias felt every eye turned to him anyway. He lowered his gaze, trying to focus on the stage where the board members arranged themselves in stiff chairs. When Calloway entered, the room shifted. He walked with exaggerated calm, carrying a folder under his arm. His eyes scanned the crowd, briefly landing on Elias, before he turned toward the stage. To Elias, he looked less like a teacher and more like a politician, calculating, ready to deliver a performance. The board chair, a gray-haired woman with glasses, banged the gavel to quiet the room. "We are here tonight to address concerns raised by community members regarding a student essay and the handling of it within Jefferson High." Immediately, murmurs rippled through the audience. Some leaned forward eagerly. Others crossed their arms in defense. Parents began stepping to the microphone during the open floor session. One mother spoke with tears in her eyes. "My children deserve to know the truth about this land." That essay gave them more history in 5 pages than their textbooks ever did. Applause erupted from one side of the room. A man followed quickly after, his tone sharp. "We send our kids to school for education, not activism. Teachers are here to teach facts, not guilt trips. This so-called essay is nothing but propaganda, and the fact it went viral is proof that boundaries were crossed." Cheers rose from the opposite side. The room grew more divided with each speaker. Every voice seemed to widen the gap rather than close it. Elias sat still, his palms sweaty against the cover of his notebook. Finally, Calloway was invited to the microphone. He walked slowly, deliberately, and adjusted the microphone with a performative sigh. "I have been a teacher for 22 years, he began, his voice steady but carrying a tremor of outrage. "I have devoted my career to helping young people succeed. And yet, in 1 week, I have been painted as a villain because I dared to hold a student accountable to standards." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some nodded sympathetically. Others frowned. "This essay," Calloway continued, tapping the folder in his hands, "was not objective. It was not factual. It relied on so-called sources that are nothing more than myths. And because I graded it fairly, I am being accused of silencing voices. Let me be clear, this is not about silencing. This is about integrity. If we allow sentiment and legend to masquerade as scholarship, we betray the very purpose of education." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And now I am being targeted. Yes, targeted by what they call cancel culture. A mob out for blood, punishing teachers for doing their jobs. Is that the lesson we want our children to learn?" The room erupted, half in applause, half in boos. The board chair banged the gavel again, calling for order. Elias's chest tightened. Calloway was turning himself into the victim, twisting the narrative until the very act of telling the truth became an attack. His father leaned closer, whispering, "Don't let him own the story." Mrs. Alvarez's hand brushed his arm lightly. "Be ready," she murmured. Elias frowned. "For what?" At that moment, the board chair cleared her throat. "We've heard from teachers and parents," she said firmly. "But since this controversy began with a student's work, it is only fair that the student himself be given the chance to speak." The words hit Elias like a bell tolling. Heads turned in unison, eyes searching the crowd, until they landed on him. The weight of the room shifted, pressing down. His pulse thundered in his ears. He hadn't expected this. He thought he could remain in the back, a silent center while others argued around him. But now the board was asking him, demanding him to step into the fire. His father gave a single nod, steady and proud. Miss Alvarez's eyes held his, unwavering. Elias tightened his grip on the notebook in his hands. The words he had scribbled the night before now burned through the cover, daring him to use them. Just before the board chair called his name, Elias realized the entire auditorium had fallen silent, waiting for him to stand, and he would have to defend not just his essay but his very right to speak. The board chair's gavel struck once more, echoing through the auditorium. "Elias Redbird," she said, her voice carrying over the restless crowd, "would you please come forward and address the board?" For a heartbeat, Elias remained frozen in his seat. His pulse hammered, every breath catching against his chest like a bird trying to escape a cage. The faces in the auditorium blurred. Parents leaning forward, students whispering, journalists lifting cameras, all waiting for him. His father touched his shoulder, steady and grounding. "Though, son," he murmured, "your voice belongs here." Ms. Alvarez leaned in from his other side, whispering with quiet conviction, "This is your moment, Elias. Don't give it back to him." Elias swallowed hard, then rose. Each step down the aisle felt like wading through water, slow and heavy. He clutched his notebook against him, the scrawled words inside suddenly both anchor and weapon. When he reached the front, the board chair gestured to the microphone. Elias gripped the stand, his knuckles pale. The microphone hummed softly, waiting. For a moment, all he could see was Calloway, arms still crossed, eyes narrowed with disdain. It would be so easy to shrink, to falter, to confirm everything Calloway wanted the crowd to believe. But then Elias remembered the classroom, the laughter at his accent, the red F, the words provincial and myth. He remembered his father's story, and Miss Alvarez's steady gaze. He took a breath and began. "My name is Elias Redbird. I'm 16 years old, and a week ago I was asked to rewrite history for a grade." The words came slow at first, his voice wavering, but with each sentence, strength grew. "I was told to write objectively, to remove what was personal, to strip out what was called bias. But when I tried to tell the story of my people, the story of this land, we were dismissed as myth. My grade said F, not because it wasn't researched, not because it wasn't true, but because the truth didn't fit the version of history this classroom wanted to hear." The room shifted. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some parents leaned forward, brows furrowed, while others shook their heads. Elias's voice steadied. "I was laughed at in front of my classmates because of how I speak, because my accent didn't sound like theirs. I was told my words were provincial, as if they didn't belong. I was told my history was folklore, as if my people were ghosts." Gasps rose from parts of the crowd. The journalists scribbled faster. Elias looked down at his notebook, then back up. "But when I spoke in class, the room went silent. Not because my words were funny, not because they were weak, but because they were heavy. Heavy with what this country doesn't like to admit. That land was stolen. Names were erased. Children were silenced." His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. "This school is built on that land, on silence. And when I tried to break that silence, I was punished for it." The auditorium grew stiller with every word. The restless energy that had fueled debates moments before began to melt into something quieter, heavier. Elias pressed on. "I'm not here to attack anyone. I'm here because I was told that if I didn't rewrite history the way it's already written, I wouldn't pass. But the truth is, history doesn't need to be rewritten to protect people's comfort. It needs to be rewritten to tell what was erased, to tell the stories that were buried." A mother in the front row wiped at her eyes. A student near the middle leaned forward, lips parted. Even some board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing at one another. Elias's hands shook as he turned a page in his notebook. "My father told me once that people laugh so they don't have to listen. That's what happened to me in class. But laughter doesn't erase the truth, and neither does silence. My essay may have gotten an F, but out there," he gestured toward the journalists, the cameras, the parents holding printed copies. "Out there, people are listening. Out there, people are sharing it. And that tells me I wasn't wrong. It tells me this isn't just a grade. It's big. I won't apologize for telling the truth. And I won't rewrite my essay to make it easier to read. Because if we keep erasing what hurts, then history will never heal." The final words hung heavy, almost too heavy for the air to carry. The silence that followed was different from the silence in his classroom weeks ago. This silence was thick, raw, unbroken, because no one knew how to respond. Then, slowly, a sound. Applause. It started from a cluster of parents near the middle. Then students joined. Then more. Soon, the entire left half of the auditorium was on its feet, clapping, some even cheering through tears. The other half remained seated, stiff, some shaking their heads, others muttering angrily. The room was split, but Elias's words had undeniably shifted it. He stepped back from the microphone, chest heaving, eyes wide. He hadn't expected applause. He hadn't expected tears. But he knew, deep down, he had spoken with everything inside him. The board chair cleared her throat, trying to restore order as the applause faded. She glanced at her fellow board members, then back at the crowd. Her voice trembled slightly, but her words carried weight. "Thank you, Elias," she said. "After reviewing the concerns raised tonight, and in light of what we've heard, this board will immediately open a review of Mr. Calloway's position at Jefferson High." The words detonated like a thunderclap. Gasps erupted. Journalists scrambled, cameras flashing. Elias turned sharply toward Calloway. For the first time, his teacher's confident mask cracked. His jaw tightened. His face flushed deep red. He looked less like the untouchable authority he always played, and more like a man cornered. As the gavel struck to end the meeting, Calloway leaned toward a board member, whispering furiously. Elias caught just enough to know this fight wasn't over. Calloway wasn't going down quietly. The board meeting ended in chaos. Half the auditorium cheering, the other half shouting, reporters jostling to capture soundbites. Elias slipped out the side door with his father and Miss Alvarez, his chest still pounding from the adrenaline. But even as the cool night air hit his face, he knew it wasn't over. Calloway's furious whisper to the board member replayed in his mind, like the hiss of a snake. By morning the storm had grown louder. The headline on the local news site read, "Student Speech Prompts Review of Jefferson High Teacher." Underneath, a photo of Elias at the microphone stared back at him, mouth open mid-sentence, eyes ablaze with conviction. The comments section split like the auditorium, half applauding, half seething. But the twist came when another headline appeared, that afternoon, this time from a state-level newspaper. "Complaints against Jefferson teacher span a decade." Elias clicked, heart racing. The article detailed records uncovered by a local journalist, one of the reporters who had been at the board meeting. Through public records requests, she had found multiple complaints filed against Mr. Calloway over the years. Parents of Black, Latino, and Asian students had lodged grievances about demeaning comments, cultural insensitivity, and unfair grading practices. Reading the words, Elias felt a mix of shock and grim recognition. It wasn't just him. He hadn't been the first. He wouldn't have been the last. The article spread quickly, shared by advocacy groups, educators, and alumni who added their own stories in the comments. "He told me my essay sounded like a diary entry, not an academic paper. He mocked my name during roll call every day for a year. He said my history project on Japanese internment was biased because it didn't include the government's perspective." One post came from a former student now in college. "We complained. Nothing happened. Maybe now people will listen." The weight of it hit Elias like a wave. His fight had cracked something open, exposing years of silence that had been covered over. Calloway's authority, once untouchable, was unraveling thread by thread. At school, the atmosphere shifted. Students whispered in hallways, but this time the whispers weren't just about Elias. They were about Calloway. Some kids pulled up articles on their phones, showing each other passages with wide eyes. "I thought it was just me," one girl muttered. Another shook his head. "I can't believe they let it go on this long." By lunchtime, rumors swirled that Calloway hadn't shown up for class. A substitute sat at his desk looking bewildered as students buzzed with speculation. "Mr. Calloway has been placed on administrative suspension pending a full investigation." The statement was brief, but it detonated across social media. Some parents applauded the decision, while others decried it as caving to mob pressure. Calloway himself released a defiant email to local press, claiming he was the victim of an orchestrated smear campaign designed to destroy a dedicated teacher. But the weight of the uncovered complaints made his protests sound hollow. For Elias, the news was both vindication and burden. He hadn't set out to take down a teacher, only to defend his voice. But now an entire system of silence was cracking, because of words he had once thought would never be heard. At home, his mother hugged him tightly, whispering, "You spoke for more than yourself." His father placed a hand on his shoulder, pride etched in the lines of his face. This is what it means to carry the story forward. But Elias wasn't so sure. With each step forward, he felt the ground shifting beneath him. What would school look like now? Would classmates treat him as a hero, or blame him for toppling a teacher who had ruled for years? That night, he sat at his desk, staring at the leather-bound book Miss Alvarez had given him, the one filled with stories of erasure and resilience. He thought about the kids who had come before him, silenced or mocked, their complaints ignored. He thought about the kids who might come after him. And for the first time he realized his fight wasn't just about passing or failing. It was about legacy, about whether silence would keep winning or whether words could finally cut through. The next morning, as Elias walked through the school doors, the noise hit him immediately. Conversations cut off as he passed. Some students looked at him with admiration, nodding or offering quiet smiles. Others glared, their whispers sharp as blades. He kept his head high, though his stomach twisted. Every step felt like walking a tightrope, uncertain which way the balance would tip. When Elias stepped into the classroom, the substitute teacher gave him a nervous smile, and every eye turned to him. In that moment, Elias realized the hardest part wasn't that Calloway was gone, it was that he had to face what came next. Would his classmates stand with him, or turn against him? The Monday after Calloway's suspension, Jefferson High felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just charged, like the air before a storm. Students clustered in tight groups in the hallways, phones in hand, their voices low but buzzing. Some looked at Elias with quick nods of recognition, others with eyes that flickered away the moment he glanced back. He had become something he never asked to be, a symbol. When he walked into third period English, the desk at the front was empty, except for a substitute teacher sitting stiffly with a clipboard. The woman smiled politely, but she didn't command the room the way Calloway once had. The air inside was strange, liberating to some, unsettling to others. Elias sat down in his usual seat near the window. Conversations dimmed. He could feel the weight of glances settling on his back. The substitute cleared her throat. "We'll be reviewing essay structures today. Still getting familiar with where you left off." Her voice wavered with nerves. The class wasn't used to her, and she wasn't used to them. It didn't matter. Everyone knew what hung in the air wasn't grammar rules. It was Calloway's absence. After class, as Elias packed up, a voice stopped him. "Hey." He turned. Priya stood a few desks away, clutching her books tightly to her chest. Her eyes were hesitant, but steady. "I wanted to say I'm sorry for laughing back then." Elias blinked, caught off guard. "I didn't mean to," she added quickly. It felt safer to laugh than to be the one getting laughed at. But it wasn't right. And I know that now." Her voice cracked. Elias studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you." The apologies trickled slowly that week. Elias stopped him in the cafeteria, murmuring a quiet, "I should have had your back sooner." Dante admitted, "Posting it without asking you wasn't fair, but I'd do it again because people needed it." But for every apology, there was silence. Sloane passed him in the hall, without a glance. A group of boys whispered "activist" under their breath like it was an insult. Some students treated him like a hero, others like a threat. Elias carried both reactions quietly, not letting either inflate or deflate him. At home the weight pressed differently. His mother hovered more, watching him closely at dinner, as if she worried the attention might crush him. His father remained steady, though Elias caught him pacing the porch at night, cigarette glowing in the dark, as though wrestling with pride and worry in equal measure. One evening, Miss Alvarez stopped Elias as he packed up in the library. She slid a book across the table, a collection of essays by young writers of color. "You should be in something like this," she said. Elias frowned. "Me? Why not you?" she countered. "Your words already made people listen. Imagine what else they could do if you shared more." Elias picked up the book, flipping through its pages. Each essay carried the voice of someone who refused to be silenced. He felt a pull, like he was staring at a map of roads he hadn't dared to travel yet. "I don't know if I'm ready," he admitted. Miss Alvarez smiled softly. Neither were they. But they wrote anyway. Her encouragement planted a seed. That night, Elias sat at his desk, staring at a blank page. For weeks he had poured everything into one essay. Could he do it again? Could he write something new, not for a grade, not against a teacher, but for himself? The thought terrified him, but it also thrilled him. The unexpected twist came 2 days later. Walking home from school, Elias noticed someone had taped a photocopy of his essay to the community bulletin board near the corner store. Beneath it, handwritten in marker, were the words, "Truth can't be graded." He froze, staring. People passing by stopped to read it, some nodding thoughtfully, others frowning before moving on. It was no longer just his essay. It was becoming part of the community, something he couldn't control. The realization shook him. His words weren't his alone anymore. They belonged to everyone who read them, who debated them, who saw themselves in them. At first, the attention scared him. But as the week went on, he began to feel something else: responsibility. By Friday, he opened his notebook and began to write again. Not an assignment, not a rebuttal, just words that burned to be spoken. He wrote about his grandmother's stories, about his father's quiet strength, about the river that still carried its original name, even when maps tried to erase it. His pen moved faster than his fear. Still, the question of how far this would go weighed heavy. Some students treated him like a leader, others treated him like a warning, and he knew the investigation into Calloway wasn't over. It loomed like a shadow, threatening to drag him back into the storm at any moment. That night, as Elias sat at his desk, his email pinged with a new message. He almost ignored it, expecting another notification from the endless stream of posts. But the subject line made him freeze. "Your essay reached me." He clicked it open. The message was from a university professor, an expert in Native American studies at a nearby state college. "Elias, I read your essay after it was republished on the education blog. Your voice carries power and clarity well beyond your years. I would like to meet with you. Our department often hosts guest speakers, and I believe your story deserves a larger platform. Please let me know if you're willing." Elias sat back, staring at the screen. His chest tightened, but not with fear this time, with something else. Possibility. He whispered the words aloud, almost disbelieving. "A professor wants to meet me." And for the first time, he wondered if his voice might carry further than even he dared to imagine. The email from the professor replayed in Elias's mind for days. He read it again and again, each time feeling a strange mixture of disbelief and quiet pride. His words, once mocked, dismissed, and stamped with a red F, had traveled far enough to be recognized by someone who built their life studying the very histories Elias was told didn't matter. But life at Jefferson High went on. Calloway's suspension left a void in the classroom, filled by a rotating cast of substitutes. The substitutes, cautious and temporary, mostly read from lesson plans and avoided controversy. Yet the absence spoke louder than any lecture. For Elias, returning each day carried a different kind of weight. The stares hadn't disappeared, but they shifted, no longer just eyes of ridicule. They were eyes of calculation, curiosity, sometimes admiration, sometimes resentment. His classmates couldn't decide if he was someone to look up to or someone to fear becoming. One gray morning, the substitute, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Hensley, asked for volunteers to read aloud from the day's text, a passage about identity in American literature. The room fell into its usual silence, students avoiding eye contact. Elias stared at the words on the page, his chest tightening. The moment mirrored that day weeks ago, when Calloway had called on him, when laughter had cut through him like a blade. He remembered the heat in his cheeks, the sound of his classmates' laughter bouncing off the walls, the way Calloway smirked as though Elias had confirmed something he'd always believed. But this time no one called on him. He could have remained silent, hiding in the comfort of anonymity. Yet something inside him stirred. The echo of his father's words, Ms. Alvarez's encouragement, the applause at the board meeting, and the professor's email reminding him his voice had power. The class turned in unison, surprise rippling across the rows. Even Mr. Hensley blinked before nodding gratefully. "Go ahead, Elias." Elias stood slowly, the book in his hands heavier than its weight. He began reading, his accent threaded through his voice, not hidden, not softened, but present, proud. Each word landed with clarity. He did not stumble. He did not shrink. The classroom was silent, but not the silence of waiting for a mistake. It was the silence of listening. Some students leaned forward. Priya gave a faint, encouraging smile. Even those who had once laughed sat still, eyes fixed on him, their smirks absent. The words filled the room, not because they were perfect, but because they were his, unbroken. When he finished, Elias closed the book and let the silence hang. No laughter followed, no mockery, just quiet acknowledgement. For the first time he felt not like a target, but like a voice. He sat down, heart steady. The substitute cleared his throat softly. "Thank you, Elias. That was strong." A few students nodded. Aaliyah whispered, "That was good," as he passed her desk. Even Sloane, who had remained distant for weeks, glanced at him briefly, not with warmth but not with scorn either. Something in her eyes suggested recognition, even if she would never say it aloud. The class moved on, but Elias remained rooted in the moment. He thought back to that first humiliation, the laughter that had seared into him like fire. He thought about the notebook he had filled with observations, the essay that had been buried, and then resurrected, the board meeting where he had stood trembling but unbroken. And he thought of his father's words. They laugh so they don't have to listen. But now, they were listening. Later that day, Elias sat in the library with Ms. Alvarez. He told her about the moment, how it felt to finally read aloud without the weight of ridicule. She listened quietly, then said, "That's the thing about truth, Elias. Once it's spoken, it doesn't go back into silence. It echoes." Her words lingered as he walked home under the fading evening light. He reflected on the journey. The boy who once whispered promises to himself after being mocked, now standing taller, carrying words that had moved far beyond his classroom. He realized his fight had never been about winning against Calloway alone. It was about refusing erasure, about making sure voices like his, voices long silenced, could be heard, not in pity but in respect. That night he opened his notebook and wrote one final line at the bottom of a page already crowded with scribbles. Voices that were once silenced can become the echoes that rewrite history. He stared at the sentence, then underlined it twice. For the first time, Elias felt not just like a student fighting for a grade, but like a storyteller, one whose story was only beginning. As he closed the notebook, Elias wondered how many other voices sat in classrooms across the country, silenced by laughter or dismissal. If Elias's courage moved you, don't let his story end here. Type yes if you believe every voice deserves to be heard. Subscribe if this broke your heart, and if you know silence should never win.